Talker. Now, here's more of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back, folks, to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com. In the spirit of Thanksgiving, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate those of you that listen to the show and rely on the information within it to help shape your understanding of the market and the process so that when it comes time for you to buy or sell a home, you're an informed consumer. Thank you for allowing me to do that for you. Almost a decade I've been on this program, sharing my advice and my experience as somebody that's sold over 1,200 homes and about $1 billion worth of real estate locally. And we really do enjoy helping people, whether it's something simple like, hey, I need help with a good contractor recommendation, or hey, I'm thinking about doing some things to my property. What do you think is going to be the best return on investment? Or, of course, maybe you're thinking of buying or selling or investing in real estate, or maybe you've got a property to manage, or maybe you want to sell real estate as a career, as a profession. We can help you with all that stuff, and we'd be honored to do so. 843-556-1250 is the number in the studio if you want to call and ask us some questions. My personal number, 843-800-0065, 800-0065. That's my personal cell. Or listingsincharleston.com is our website, listingsincharleston.com. So let's get back into it. We were talking about some of these different scenarios that might play out, given what happens with the market, what happens with rates and inflation and prices, inventory. What do we have in store for us? Obviously, we don't yet know how low prices are going to go, what's going to happen with interest rates, inflation, all that good stuff. We can make some educated guesses, but I want to talk about kind of the mentality that I would have if I were buying a house right now, and of course, if I were selling a house right now. Because right now we're still dealing with a little bit of, hey, I'd like to sell, but I don't see anything that I like on the market. There's nowhere for me to go. We're still dealing with some elements of that because the reality is inventory, even though it's increased pretty significantly from the bottom of the inventory that we had, which at one point in time, I think we had like just a hair over 500 homes in the Tri-County area. When you removed, new construction or proposed construction listings, and when you removed properties that were in our MLS but are actually in like Columbia or Greenville, it was a little over 500. We've got about 3,200 now. I think when I checked this morning, we're a little over 3,200. So inventory is still increasing, and it's certainly better than where it was, but we're still a long ways away from it being what I would call a, quote, buyer's market on paper, because we were talking a little earlier about when you look at supply of inventory, which is kind of how we measure the health of a real estate market, anything under 6 months supply of inventory historically, since the beginning of the Case-Shiller Index, says that prices will go up. They will not go down. And I think we're about to debunk that myth because we have low inventory and prices have already gone down. They've gone down 1.3% from June to August nationally. And there are pockets of Charleston, of course, where prices have come down a little bit as well. So if I'm a buyer right now, well, first of all, we're still dealing with, I'd like to sell, but where do I go? Now we're dealing more with, I don't want to lose my interest rate, what we call the lock-in effect. But if I'm a buyer right now and I'm looking for, there's two main groups of people out there. There are people that are just opportunistic in nature. Nothing's driving them to make an immediate decision. They're not buying because they're getting a new job. They're not buying because there's some sort of necessity that causes them to buy right now. It's more of a want. I'd like to do it if it makes sense. Then you've got the folks that are saying, well, look, my lease is coming up. They're jacking up the rental rates another $300 a month on me. I'm actually paying more to rent right now than it would be to own. And I don't see that being something that changes, quite frankly, anytime soon, by the way. Rental prices are astronomical in Charleston. I was looking for some research that I'd done a few shows ago. You can go to my website, listingsincharleston.com, or look us up on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, all that good stuff, and listen to previous shows and hear my rental market analysis. But, if I'm a buyer right now, I'm looking for opportunities. So you've got those folks that I'd like to do it, and then you've got those other folks that have said, this makes sense for me financially, I need to do this, rather than renting and throwing money away. So if I'm a buyer right now, here are some things that have changed pretty quickly. I'm now seeing a lot more contracts where closing costs are involved again. We have to compare this to the market that was, it was fueled by jet fuel over the past few years. It was just, prices were rising astronomically. You were lucky to be the one that won the bid on the house. Rather, you weren't looking through the lens of, well, am I getting a good deal? It's, am I actually going to be the one that wins the bid on this house amongst all these other people that are interested? That has changed very, very quickly. Very seldom now are we seeing multiple offer situations. They still exist, and you still have the ability to create that. You can do that intelligently. It's a strategy that we sometimes employ, a little bit riskier, but could have a higher reward. But anyways, if I'm looking at contracts right now compared to where they were, you're seeing a lot more buyers getting closing costs assistance because you've got two main cash sums that you're going to have to bring to the table to buy a house. It's your down payment and then your closing costs if you're getting a mortgage. So we're seeing a lot of sellers paying for that again. We're seeing sellers that are offering home warranties. They're giving you basically a 1-year insurance policy on the house that you buy for all the major components of it, the mechanicals, HVAC, appliances, so on and so forth. By the way, this is something really interesting that is pretty specific to our local market. And that is the timing associated with replacing roofs and HVAC systems. And I want you to think about this. Follow me for a second. And it makes sense. When was Hurricane Hugo? 1989. Then, 1990, we had a plethora of roof and HVAC system replacements. HVAC systems, roof, their roofs are supposed to be, they say they're good for 30 years. Rarely does a roof last 30 years without giving you some major problems. So they usually get replaced in around 20-ish years. HVAC systems, a little less than that, 10 to 15 years. Well, if you back, we're basically 32 years after Hurricane Hugo and all of those roofing and HVAC replacements. In other words, there are a very large portion of homes right now that are getting close to needing a roof and an HVAC replacement. You as a buyer need to be prepared for some of these big expenses when you're out shopping for real estate. So we're starting to see more and more negotiability as a result of that. That's something that should be absolutely factored into the equation. If you're going to buy a home that was built, let's say in 2005, there's a ton of them, that were built in the mid 2000s that haven't had their roof or HVAC system replaced yet. You've also got folks out there that are reading the room and saying, I don't have a mortgage balance on my property, and I don't necessarily need access to that lump sum of cash right now. So I'm going to make my home more attractive than, frankly, any other home out there, and I'm going to offer seller financing. I'm going to put a property out there at maybe a 6% interest rate or a 5.5% interest rate for a year or two to help that buyer save more for a down payment, save more cash, become more liquid, so that they can refinance into a more traditional 30-year fixed product once mortgage rates come down, which hopefully is the case. But I'll tell you, if you're a buyer, the good news is that the pendulum is finally starting to swing in your direction, right? We've had 10 years of it being basically a seller's market, especially over the past few years. It's been a tough go for buyers. Now you've finally got some negotiating power. The seller's not holding all the cards. Use that to your advantage. If I'm representing a buyer and we're looking at a home that's been on the market for several months, I'm going to pitch the narrative that, hey, I'm sorry, but I can't buy this property at today's prices. I have to buy the property at what I believe will be the future price to hedge against what I believe is going to be a reduction in value. I don't want to buy your property and then have it become worth less. I want some safety. I want a cushion, and I want it now. And we're finding more and more sellers are now willing to give that because they realize that if we're in a market where prices are going to go down, demand really isn't there, affordability sucks. I mean, all these different things, they're more negotiable. Use that to your advantage. We're getting more calls from folks right now, by the way, that are not necessarily in desperate need of selling their property, but they are now of the mindset that, hey, now's the time. Now's the time where I'm going to sell. I'm going to cash in as much of this equity as I can, which, by the way, we've got a ton of it. I bought my property about 7.5 years ago in Mount Pleasant. My property has doubled in value. I know a lot of people are in the same boat. So we have massive amounts of equity. And before we get too ahead of ourselves, let us just remember that if we are comparing what's happening right now to the market of, let's just say, last year, we're comparing ourselves and our current situation to a market that was in no way, shape, or form sustainable. That was not normal. We're returning to normalcy. So let's not be Chicken Little and say that the sky is falling, but let's have a very clean or clear grasp of what's going on right now so we can position ourselves accordingly. And that's what I want to talk about when we come back. If you're a seller right now, there are some things that I think you really need to take into consideration, including the timing of everything, the preparation that you're going to go through in order to get your home on the market, to sell it for the most money, and then, of course, the marketing associated with that property to get you top dollar. So I'm going to talk about that when we return. Again, we're live in the studio. If you have any questions you'd like to ask with about 10 minutes left, 843-556-1250. If you want to reach out to me personally, it's 843-800-0065 or listingsincharleston.com. Stick around for the last few minutes of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA.
Visit Brian Beatty's website at listingsincharleston.com. The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues next on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA.